From the News Channel 5 Network, this is Urban Outlook.
Hello and welcome to Urban Outlook. I'm April Eaton. Thank you so much for being with us today. I think every family has them, those family favorite recipes that show up on the special holiday occasions or during Sunday dinner, those delicious delicacies that are passed down from generation to generation. For me, it's my grandma's salmon loaf and her peach cobbler and my nana's sloppy chocolate cake. Even though they're no longer here, we do our best to duplicate the dish and make them just as tasty as they were back in their day. Well, a mother and daughter duo has taken that family's celebration of recipes to a different level. They are sharing them beyond the walls of their home in this brand new book that's out since February. It's called Soul Food Love, Healthy Recipes Inspired by 100 Years of Cooking in a Black Family. But they're also sharing them along with their own family history, as I say, in a different sort of way, in a new sort of way, and a healthier way. So we thought we'd have this mother-daughter team on the show today, authors Alice Randall and her daughter Caroline Randall Williams. And I'm sure you remember Alice Randall from the best-selling novel, The Wind Done Gone. So thank you both for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
April, it's wonderful to be here and have my co-writer and daughter with me.
Oh, I know you're so proud.
I am.
Let's start, because before we get into the real-life characters in this book, who are the matriarchs of your families, let's talk a little bit about how this came about. What prompted you all to write Soul Food Love?
Do you want to start with that, Mom? I do.
I think, I had gotten to be over 225 pounds, as you know, and Caroline started, I started my own weight loss journey, and we came in here with Ada's rules about that.
Yes.
But a lot of mine was about the walking, the 888, the sleeping, the drinking the water. But Caroline came in and started making this wonderful food for me. Just when I thought the food would be about deprivation, to be on this ongoing struggle, Caroline started renovating the family history, culinary history, and creating wonderful recipes, and also sharing with me recipes that she was using down in Mississippi, where she was a graduate student.
What made you decide to kind of transform those recipes? Because I'm thinking, well, obviously you've got sort of a cooking flair.
Right.
You've got a knowledge of cooking and food and how all that kind of pulls together into delicious meals. But what made you say, you know what, the dieting and trying to lose weight doesn't have to always taste so bad. It can really taste very lovely with our own recipes.
Well, I have to say it really came very naturally. I was teaching school in the Mississippi Delta. I did Teach for America straight out of college, and so I was having to cook for myself on a teacher's budget, day in and day out, 3 meals a day. And I've always wanted to be healthy because I come from generations of strong black women who have large, beautiful black bodies, but I was always really invested in avoiding some of the health struggles that I watched happen as they got older, my grandmothers and my great-grandmothers. So I've always tried to eat healthfully, and when I was home cooking, and you're living in Mississippi, it's a very sort of evocative experience to be in the Delta, driving back and forth and going to the grocery stores I had access to. I started to get creative with spices. I started to think of, different ways to bake a chicken or different ways to prepare my green vegetables that I was naturally going to, and ways that my students wouldn't tease me when they saw my lunch, when I was in the Delta.
Yes.
So it all sort of came together really naturally for me that way.
Wow, you talk about the generations of women that have put together some very beautiful recipes. But even before we start sharing that, talk a little about, because it's interesting that you talk about, we had a family of beautiful women, prominent women in this Nashville community, but beautiful bodies as well, and sometimes big, beautiful bodies.
Absolutely.
But there was something that I read in here that talked about sort of the correlation between the prestige of having a big meal at the table and eating a wonderful, luxurious meal, and then the size that you became. And that almost carried some prominence in its past for your family as well. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Dear, my grandmother, and Grandma Bontemps, those are two of Caroline's great-grandmothers. Both were large women. Dear often called herself big as 2 or 3 houses, and she said that proudly. And she was a matriarch in her family, and here in Nashville, Grandma Bontemps was one of the original founders of the Links chapter here. She was a Fisk faculty wife. known for her abilities as a hostess, but she was a very large woman, and many of the other matriarchs that she was close to were too, and that was part of Grandma Bontemps' gravitas. When she was older and started to lose weight when she was sick, now she lived to be in her late 90s, she would say, in my prime, and she'd say, but I weighed over 200 pounds. And she was just a force of nature,
right,
and stunningly beautiful at all sizes.
Right, but it was theirs. Was it a cultural thing to make sure that I guess the table was full, and I've got to go back and see if I can find that section that you all wrote about it, but I'm sure you remember. But it talked kind of about, let me see if I can find it, but it just talked about the fact that honoring, maybe this is what, honoring mothers and grandmothers that came before them and sitting at a formal table that only they could serve. That before they couldn't sit at that table, right? The mothers and the grandmothers before you, but sitting at that formal table, making those very prominent meals, kind of carried a little bit of clout with it.
Absolutely. This whole book is a love letter. Soul Food Love is a love letter to our foremothers and their kitchens. Now, I want to say that one of the things that we touch on is that this goes back to even in the slavery days. Black women were able, sometimes by fishing, to prepare a meal for their family in secret. And so even when they couldn't sit at this table, they would fish, collect wild berries, say strawberries, cook it in the fire, might even just be the stone fire, open fire, in the privacy of their cabin, and make a celebration meal for their families. So we have always been holding our families together with meals that we've created, sometimes taking a sesame seed out of our hair on the middle passage to feed a baby. So, but as we've moved on and had successes and made some achievements, the family meals that we can put at the big dining tables, deer, and Grandma Bontemps took great pride in that. Now, you know, Dear actually wasn't doing any cooking.
Well, that's what I found fascinating in the story. So talk a little bit about this, because it turned out that, and I wonder if because of her young age, she married at 15, correct?
She married at 15, but we found that her husband, Papa, was actually doing all the cooking. But we found that this happened in other black families. The reason Papa wouldn't let Dear cook is that he grew up in Selma, Alabama, and where black women were working often as domestic servants in slavery and in freedom. And he knew about kitchen rape. He was, you know, probably conceived in a kitchen rape, but it was happening all around him. And so he thought of a kitchen as a very unsafe space, and he did not want his wife in one.
Even his own kitchen, though, which I found very interesting.
Well, he wanted something different for Dear than being tied to a stove, which is one of the opportunities that black women had in the South to work. Over 90% who were working in 1900 were working on a farm or working in a kitchen. And he didn't want that for his wife. Now, they had a dry cleaners together. She raised a family. So we'd say when Dear set down her family to the table, she was actually serving the food that Papa had gotten ready. So she was doing what a lot of the white women were doing, passing out someone else's food as their own.
Because he would leave the cleaners like at midday and come in and put the food in the pot and then come back to work, is what you described in the book.
He did the double shift. So Caroline, I'm learning to do I learned from my grandfather how to, and my daughter. My daughter taught me how to work a full day and try to put food on the table, because I was a failure at that.
Most of us are. So
we ended up in restaurants, and I had a succession of hippie white ladies who helped me cook. But Caroline manages to teach down. She was managing to teach school and cook for herself at least some of this time.
You also said that Dear sort of put the finishing touches on meals in a very special way. Talk a little bit about some of the things that she contributed to that family, to those meals.
And the favorite recipes.
Well,
yes.
Well, one of my favorite stories that I actually wound up including a recipe in homage to this recipe in the book, the jugged pears, is Dear used to make for my mom when she was a little girl these dress box apples. And it's funny, I tell this story, people go, dress box apples? Yes, dresses used to come in boxes at the department store with tissue paper and all of these things. And so they're big old boxes. And she would present these dress boxes to my mother, and then she would open the lid, and inside of the dress box would be apples that Dear had poached in sugar water and dyed all of these fantastic magical colors, you know, bright blues and purples and greens. And so it would be just sort of like excess of magic in a box,
Yes.
you know, that I think my mother would tell me about this, and I would think, I've loved the idea of creating magically colored food ever since.
Yes, the way you describe it in the book is so beautifully written, and it just makes you your mouth sort of water while you're reading it.
Well, looking back, it's like wandering into a fairy tale, and it was so luscious to me when Caroline continued the tradition with her jug pear recipe.
Yes, yes. We'll have to look through and find that
substituting
picture
a
when we
lot
come
of the
back.
sugar for spices, and they're
Using
beautiful.
natural dye of the red
Yes,
wine
but
instead
still
of the
making them quite beautiful the way they look when
Stunningly
you
beautiful.
used to eat them. I think.
Absolutely magical. A whole nother generation can have magical food. And so Dear celebrated her imagination when she made this food. And that's one of the things that's really wonderful. The same way Grandma Bontemps, she was creating meals that said, in a world where black people were told every moment when they in segregation they were not important, not equal, she created meals that said, you are somebody, you are important, you are worthy of this honor, of this exquisite food.
I want to take a quick break, and when we come back, I want to get some more details about the history of the women in your family, but also bring us to today so we can talk about some of your contributions to the book as well. We'll be right back after this. Stay with us.